athletics, diving, you get a technical score and you get a degree of difficulty score, right? How hard is the trick that you were performing, and how well did you do that trick, right? So I'm hearing in your question, how hard is the school, like what is the challenge based on the student population? And then how well are they doing in that particular scenario? We have seen some places that have tested that to try to sort of measure. That's essentially what growth is trying to do, right? There are other places that have tried it on other measures, whether it be college and career readiness, et cetera. So New York City, for instance, on their graduation rate, gave bonus points for students that were overage and undercredited that the school was able to get them to graduate. We did something similar in Delaware. We had a the ninth grade on-track measure that I talked about earlier. We gave a bonus for students that had performed in the bottom quartile of assessment in 8th grade. So if they were the lowest performing students statewide, if they came into school and we saw that high school get them to get all 5 of their needed course credits, we gave them an extra point in our system, in our calculations for driving that, because we thought it was really critical to suggest that we're doing more, that those schools are doing more. So it's technically there are ways to do that. I think it's important to really think, though, not just about the rating system, but about the way in which you're doing the support around these schools and are able to differentiate what that looks like as well.
Last question, and I asked Patricia this question as well. I'm just curious in your perspective on this. I frame this, when we set a threshold for performance, and these are the cut scores. And we get a certain percentage of students or schools that reach that, and then the idea was presented this morning was that we would increase expectations, we'd raise the bar. And I'm curious, does that bar need to be raised for everyone at that point? So if we set this is the cut score, 70% of our schools or whatever threshold reach it, we raise the bar for them, but if we continue to do that for everyone, you have this lowest performing school, they may be making great progress, but it's always out of reach for them.
Yeah. So
what if we kept that threshold there until a percentage of these schools raised up, and then the bar reestablishes for them?
So the I guess I would question, not saying I disagree with Patricia, but I would question whether that assumption is necessary to be carried forward, right? So I would, I don't think that, in my personal opinion, that there needs to be an automatic movement of bar every time that there's a movement up for schools, because I think
triggers.
Because I think that in some ways can signal that the goalposts can never be met. So I think that, from my own perspective, that can be troubling. Now, I do think there are times where it does need to be reset. I don't know that I would suggest personally having an automatic one.
So it's not a problem for you if 90% of our schools are A and Bs because they met the threshold we established?
If you guys think it's a high enough threshold?
Good. Because I think that's what Patricia was suggesting.
Yes.
You get to a certain threshold and you move the bar.
I don't think that.
So you never get to 100%, never get to 90%, because the bar is always going to be moved.
In my opinion, I think you want to create a system where schools can demonstrate that they're excelling, and that should be something that you should target. Now, again, that's not to say that it should never be moved and it should never be changed, but I don't think that necessarily, I wouldn't set an automatic target.
So how does that thought go down to the individual student level? Because we're continually changing that bar as well. So if we're going to have this conversation, we need to have the conversation about we keep moving that bar for the individual student.
And now I'm going to leave.
No. I'm just saying that's the reality of it. So where we're raising the bar to be an A, we're also raising the bar of pass, did not pass, pass plus.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I think, that for me, it's really a question of what is the right figuring out what that right expectation level is. I can't tell you whether. Yeah, I can't tell you whether or not that's it. Again, it changes. It does change over time. I'm not going to say that one standard 20 years never change. We get new data, we get new information about what performance is, but if you've come to a definition around what college and career readiness is, for instance, in the state, and that's agreed upon for 5 years, great. I don't know that you should change it every year.
Well, I think it's the same, and I think your point, correct me, is the cut score set. When we look at impact data against a particular cut score, if 95% of our kids passed based on the cut score, we would not establish that cut score. We would drop it, or we would raise that.
And we continue
Same
to change
thing
the
if only
standards.
30%
So
passed,
there's a
we
whole
would-
cycle to it.
That's right, we'd lower it.
That's where I
We would
think
never allow that to happen.
That's right.
I'm now stepping outside of my pool, so I will not say much here. But that's where I think it's important to look at the transition data, because that really can tell you can give you a good scenario or sense of, is the level set at the right point where kids actually are being successful? Because you wouldn't want to set it at a low level that signals to parents and to students that they're being successful, and then they get to higher ed and they have to go into remediation, right? So that's the sort of trade-off that we think it's important to look at that data around transitions to help frame some of your larger conversations. All right. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Grab some lunch on your way out, because I'm worried about you. Go into mom mode.
Sugar. I had a lot of sugar.
Well, so grab some lunch on your way out. Thank you. I think so. You guys ready?
You guys ready? Okay. So key in.
I know Gordon said he wishes we would just slow down.
That was on the first screen that said, don't ask for a delay.
Okay, so key insights for Ryan's presentation.
For me, it's the last one, the point of whether we continue to adjust performance thresholds based on school performance or aggregate school performance. Did that capture that? Yeah.
So whether we continue to adjust performance thresholds,
Based on some trigger.
okay. Okay.
And to that, Ryan, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your point was it's not that we don't ever move that bar, it's just it's not a constant movement.
It's automatic.
Yeah, it's automatic. That's a much better word. Good. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. So tell me what you would like documented.
I'm going to go a different direction. Mine was the fact we have to select items that educators can take action on. Let's make sure that this is a problem. If we're laying out a problem, let's make sure it's something that we can address, not just something that exists. And you can put an asterisk beside Vince's first point, because that was the takeaway today for me.
This is you confirm that?
Home run, yes.
Okay. Yes.
How the Indiana statute regarding college and career plans for 6th and 9th graders could be built out into a metric.
So how the Indiana statute regarding
College and career plans for 6th and 9th graders.
and do what?
How that can be built into a metric.
How that could be built into the
Or
method.
developed into a metric. Oh,
Sorry, is it?
how it can be developed into a metric.
Okay.
I was trying to get the next one together.
I would confirm BJ's number 2 as well.
Okay.
And the example I have, for me, it was FAFSA. You're expecting parents to complete a document, disclose financial information, and now you're going to hold schools accountable for that. And I think schools need to be held accountable for things they control.
So would you like me to write that? Schools need to be held accountable for things they can control?
I think.
Or you're just affirming?
You can just
that?
say,
I think
take
affirm
action on
something.
the work that they control.
Well, but it was on a dashboard,
Yeah.
which, for me, whether it's driving the score or we're saying to the public, this matters for this school.
I think that's the key point.
I think they're similar.
We're already tracking that, celebrating that. We're already doing that outside of the accountability
Okay.
system. So it's not that we're not watching it. It's
Fast
not that
side.
schools don't, yes, that they don't have their eye on it. It goes back to the point of everything doesn't have to be in the accountability system. But that is something we are definitely watching and definitely seeing the importance of as a state.
And I would hope that we look at those other criteria that you gave us there, that we're giving that same attention to those students that are entering the workforce. I know the $8,000 to $9,000 figure was pretty scary. That would not be the case in Evansville, Indiana. And we have 140 openings in Berry Classic to start out at $45,000 or $50,000 a year. That's more money than the people that we're evaluating make. So that is success.
So, would you like me to document that you want to take a look at the other criteria Ryan presented?
I want to make sure that we, I hate to keep going back to the same point, the fact that when we align this with pathways, that we are celebrating, or we are recognizing entering the workforce equally with all the other options. And filling out FAFSA, in my opinion, doesn't do that. We spend 78% of our students to college and 40% of them do not graduate. They get admitted, leave with a whole bunch of debt, and then K-12 is criticized for remediation when the students probably shouldn't have got in to begin with.
Yes.
So I'm thinking about what Patricia talked about this morning, and then what Ryan referred to as the big A, little a. And so, and then kind of that need for that communication that parents understand. And so just the importance from both presentations of communicating to parents and to our public in terms of maybe the big A accountability grade is there on a report card with the little A's also being present so they get that complete picture. I think it's really important to stay streamlined in what our big A is, what's really most important to measure and hold us accountable for versus the things that we also value that are not part of the accountability system.
Is captured area and importance of communicating to parents our big A versus that little A. I think we all won't remember what that is, hopefully. Okay. Now I will be assistant. Gordon moved, so he didn't become my
What about design, Gordon?
Okay, additional insights from Ryan's presentation, and then we'll move into more of a direct fact finding.
Development of an SEL metric, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
What number am I on?
Gave that one a number
Six.
one?
Six.
No, number six, okay.
Oh, you mean that.
I'll type all this up later, so I'm trying to keep track. Okay. Go ahead.
Tony, you said SDR.
I said development of an SEL metric.
And I said ditto. 100%.
SEO.
L,
SEL.
sorry.
Social emotional learning.
Can you spell that out for me?
Social emotional learning.
Oh, okay.
SEL.
Do you mean a little A metric or a big A metric? Okay.
Okay.
The kind of the discussion about leading versus lagging indicators, the fact that, like, I wanting to measure post-secondary, but that it would be a 12-month measure.
So
Versus
tell me more about.
a leading indicator would be 9th grade measurement versus 12-month post-secondary measurement.
Okay. Katie, did you have one?
So I've been going back through today and I've been looking at the draft that we had before we came to this point, and just in everything that the speakers have been saying, we were very much in the ballpark. We had 7 indicators, which is in that sweet spot of 6 to 9, and the items that we had in there that we, spent so much time talking about were very much in this wheelhouse: the well-rounded educational development and the high school on track indicator. So just, going back to where we were, there's more finessing to do now that we have this additional insight, but I do think we should affirm, or my statement on the board is, Katie affirms, that we were on the right path. We have more insights, to help us make sure that we're aligned with best practices and this coaching from national experts. But where we were has been affirmed by the leaders that were here today.
Okay. Did I capture that, Katie? I lost something.
I have a hard time reading from that far away, so It looks pretty good.
Okay. Feel good about these? We'll move on to general fact finding.
All right, interest and opportunities metric. I was just trying to learn what else go.
This and,
Number 9,
oh, okay.
interest and opportunities metric.
And Kristen, so the record's accurate, the one above it should be 8 indicators and not 7. I miscounted.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
I think to Tony's point, perhaps on number 9, are the interesting opportunities, and you know, Ryan's response to the question I asked about inequities that exist within communities around work-based experiences, and just how we address that, and to think of options and ways in which we can engage students in robust experiences.
Inequities in workplace experiences.
Yes, that works. Thank you.
Okay. So moving on to general fact finding, what we're looking for in this section of the meeting is information from each of you about what you believe to be true about the situation. So, for example, Katie had done a simplex before, so she said, Katie affirms, etc., right? So if you believe something but you're not sure if it's fact, you can say, I believe this, and we'll record it that way. The other thing we're looking for is just as much information as possible. We're not going to converge on it today. What'll happen is I'll take all of this, write this all up, and give it back to you guys for the ability to review and converge on it at a later time. So we're just trying to get as many facts as we can down on paper, and we're not looking for ideas or solutions necessarily today. Okay? All right, so first question, what are the strengths and challenges of this current situation? Strengths and challenges.
We have a proposed rule that we can refine, at this point, that seems fairly, it's in the ballpark of where we need to go.
In the ballpark of?
Let me think about a better way to say that. The guidance that we've been given today about how to make sure that we have a college and career-focused accountability system in accordance with national best practices.
My hand might fall off.
I know, I'm trying, I can't help this, I can't help it.
So,
We'll just stop.
you want me to keep going? I will. We
Yeah,
have
let's just
a proposed
stop.
rule that we can build on that is in the ballpark of the guidance we have been given.
Sure,
today.
that's great, good
Okay.
job.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what are we doing?
Strengths and challenges.
Yep, strengths and challenges
Strengths and
of where we're at today.
I think a strength in what I thought I heard from both presentations, we're doing a lot of things really well. And there are opportunities for improvement, of course, and that's why we're here, but a lot of things have been put in place over the last several years are solid.
Okay. Yes.
Satisfying federal expectations while developing an accountability system that meets goals of Indiana.
Satisfying federal expectations while, keep going.
Meeting the
Wow.
needs of state of Indiana.
Yeah, while developing an accountability system that meets the goals of Indiana.
creaky door.
Do you include in that or just have one letter grade?
Yeah, all of that.
What was that, Gordon?
Well, I'd include under grade was one letter grade.
One letter grade? Let me ask you another question. If this were solved, so if you solved for this accountability rule, what would Indiana have that we don't have right now?
Say that one again, please.
Let me read it to you, make sure.
Yeah.
If this were solved, what would Indiana have that we don't have now?
If what was solved?
If we had the right accountability role, if we got this right.
I would say multiple measures for elementary schools.
Second.
Motion carries.
Multiple measures for elementary schools?
Multiple data points.
Multiple
Data
data.
points.
Tell me more about that, please.
Right now it's basically set to a single test as opposed to giving a true picture of what goes on 180 days of students are in school.
So now there's a single.
And I'm not saying we don't need a bar, we don't need a proficiency bar to get to. But there are lots of other wraparound services that are provided that surely paint a picture of all the things that those schools are doing.
Okay.
And there's no, I don't know if there is a metric that exists to capture that. I would like for us to see if there is. It's really-
Chronic absenteeism included as well, correct?
Say that again?
You have
Chronic absenteeism.
growth, proficiency,
Yeah.
and then chronic absenteeism, and then English language learners.
Or
But that's in the
That's
ESSA
not the
plan.
state.
Yeah,
Correct,
that's not
the
state.
Right.
That's not in the state plan, that's in the
correct.
ESSA.
Okay, got it.
What else do we solve this problem would Indiana have that we don't have now?
That the accountability grade would indicate the school's ability to increase outcomes. So it would be reflective of the end goal.
So reflective of the school's ability to achieve outcomes?
To produce outcomes.
I'll go in on that one and say high school accountability would reflect, high school accountability would reflect the marketable skill sets, would reflect the quality and quantity of the marketable skill sets developed by their graduates.
Those transition post-secondary pieces that we've looked at, right? Whether you're job, military.
I'm not
The
saying
outcome
that.
for the
I'm
student.
not saying that. That's a little different.
Then what are you saying?
I'm saying when they walk across that stage, they've developed multiple marketable skill sets.
So does this capture, Tony, high school accountability would reflect the quantity and quality of marketable skill sets
Correct.
For
Of their
graduates.
graduates.
of the graduates?
Of the graduates. I'm not getting into how you measure it, Byron.
Did you want to build on that?
Yeah, well, yeah, then I would add to that, though, that we would have the plus to the diploma of that they're ready for something after high school, whether that's to go to some post-secondary school, military job, have certifications, those types of things.
Okay, if I agree with high school HS.
Yes.
I would say that they possess kind of a combination of those two, just transferable skills that, I mean, when I sit down with folks in manufacturing or healthcare or energy, they all want the exact same skills in their employees. I mean, whether you're making a widget or performing a task, that's irrelevant. They want those transferable skills that are transferable across sectors. Because I don't think any of us are still doing the same thing that we did when we were 18 or 22 years old. I would say none of us are doing those things, but possessing those transferable skills that are transferable across sectors and desired across sectors is one of the most important things we can do.
And building on that, I think we owe it to the students for them to have an outcome of some kind that positions them to be lifelong learners.
Absolutely.
And for economic mobility.
Yes.
So owe to the students.
To produce an outcome on graduation that positions them for economic mobility. And for that lifelong, the continuous learning that the 21st century requires in terms of career movement, it situates them for a career, not just a job.
And I would add to that some piece with the workplace learning apprenticeship piece. How are we looking at how a school's doing that? We've said that's important. Our
Sure.
governor says that's important. I think we need to look at what that looks like.
To look at what skills we're giving them from that.
Yeah, that we're doing
The
it.
tasks they're completing to me is irrelevant. It's what skills are they acquiring in that.
Yeah, how we get to that, there were several things suggested, right? But I think it needs to be a part of it.
So doctors, you would like me to document something around apprenticeships?
And workplace learning.
Okay,
I throw, that becomes a whole nother discussion, but I throw them together, but.
okay, think about it. If we fix this problem, Indiana would have a way to ensure workplace readiness for students when they graduate. I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm trying to.
Yes, but I'd rather it be that yes, that would be the outcome. But we're also looking at the workplace learning component of that. Help me out, folks.
Work-based learning would be a requisite part of the high school experience, or I'm trying to.
Yes.
Okay.
In conversations with employers, that's what they want. And that's why they love CTE kids.
Absolutely.
I mean, what Vince does, and they have hands-on, they conducted this work as opposed to reading about it. I mean, that's what makes it so powerful.
Right. And I continually am amazed at how many companies now keep saying, we don't know why you're telling kids to go to college right out of high school, because we would just assume them start with us, maybe their senior year. We'll pay for their college when they come to work for us, and we'll start. And I'm like, that's a pretty good plan, right? Financially.
How many do you hear saying they're gonna pay for their college?
Every partner we have with my program has tuition.
Everyone I visited has.
Tuition reimbursement, which is different than paying for their college.
And it's,
Right, I mean, it's different than paying for a degree and giving them $1,500 a year for reimbursement. Or $2,500.
it's up to, I think it's up to $6,000 a year. It's what Toyota offers, what Vectren offers, and what Berry offers.
SAI
Which
has
if you're
Purdue and
working, I mean,
Vincennes.
I'm assuming that would cover
in their
a full-time
plan.
student if you're working full-time.
Is that a fact you want me to?
That's not really germane, that's not germane to this at all.
This is a sidebar, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're fine, just making sure you want me to write it down. Gordon, what about you? I don't think it was that, but just trying to make sure I get everything.
Got a couple things, give me a minute.
Okay. What about this question? Why is this a difficult problem to solve?
It's a one piece of a complex system, and so it will impact other things.
Why is this, which one, the previous one or this? Why is this a difficult problem to solve?
There's no consensus on what the end looks like.
By this board or? like
In
the
general,
board
by the
has to
state,
in general?
by the state.
By anyone,
Yeah.
okay.
The country.
The universe.
Yeah, the universe.
I also just think it's, you know, it's a human, we all want everything for kids. But it's also, and I'm not even asking you to write this down, I'm just making a statement of, you know, we want to, in accountability, have our teachers do 3 simple things. You know, Patricia said, keep it simple, we want the teachers to do 3 simple things. Well, wouldn't it be nice if it were that simple? Wouldn't it be nice if we could have the teacher teach the kids to do 3 things and focus on 3 things, but we also want them to work on attendance and get them there. We want to make them good workers for the workforce. We want them to teach them grit and how to not give up when there are problems and, you know, to keep working at things. We want them to be on time every day so that they'll be good workers for the workforce. And how do you simplify that into 3 things for an accountability system to tell a teacher to teach these 3 things to our children? And that's why there's no consensus, because it's a complex system, and so to boil that down into 3 things is impossible. And so that's why there's not. And so we all want what's best, and but what we all think is what's best is a hard thing to put down into 3 simple words.
Could you say it's hard to decide what to measure?
And how to measure it.
In summary.
And so that's, you know.
In prioritize.
Very good.
Right.
Very true.
What's in, what's out.
So it's hard to decide what to prioritize, that's exactly right. Because again, and I'm not saying parents are doing it either, but, you know, we ask a lot of the education system.
And I think it's important to us to remember that whatever we put on this accountability system is what's going to be prioritized by schools.
That's exactly
Whether we
right,
like it or not,
because
I mean-
what gets tested gets taught.
Amen. That is exactly right. So we need to figure out what it is that is most important to us and then put that in the accountability system, because right now, English and language arts is what's most important to us, and that's what gets done. That's why I want an SEO, which I think fixes a lot of the things that you talked about, data point on there somewhere. If we can teach students to self-regulate and self-manage, lots of these things get taken care of.
Did you get all that?
You don't have to write all that down. I wouldn't say that.
That's why I said don't even.
That was my
write it down.
filibuster. I don't need you to write all that down.
We're going to get the gist of what you guys are saying, because in order to make the next step in the process, which is the problem definition and the idea finding, the ideating and the action plan, in order to make that work and make that the most effective process for you guys, we need to document the general feelings that you're having around the facts and what's difficult. So I'm just trying to paraphrase. I don't want to, my colleague will take over for this, but I don't want to leave her without what she needs to move it forward. Okay, all right.
To me,
Yes.
this speaks to the complexity issue, but, and I made this statement earlier, but you look across multiple sectors, higher education, business, and so forth. There are very few examples in which we take one accountability system and apply it to everything and expect everyone to meet the same outcomes. And there's some recognition that these things are different across sectors. We don't hold Ivy Tech the same expectations we may hold Purdue to in terms of the students we serve. Is that inaccurate?
We're funded the same,
But based on those outcomes, right?
yes,
I mean, you're serving students and you're moving them toward a 2-year degree. There's not an expectation that we all do the exact same thing. Right? And systems are built that way. Where in K-12, the system is built that we have to get the same outcomes. Right? And there's little recognition that schools are extremely different. Not to have low expectations. That's always a challenge we have, is that we're not trying to hold some students to lower expectations. How do we raise the bar for all students? But it's hard to compare the conditions that exist in some of our schools in northern Hamilton County and some of our school systems that exist in central Indianapolis. And to me, that's the challenge we have, or a big challenge.
I always think about no matter what school system you're involved in, whether it's public, non-public, charter, any teacher that signs a teaching contract has agreed to teach the Indiana academic standards. And so there is that common expectation, no matter what the setting, that that's the bar we're trying to achieve with our children, that we want them to be successful within the academics of those standards. That part is the same. The conditions around every community are vastly different. And so when I think about, that's why that big A, little a resonated with me, because I think about what are all of us required to do, and then what are the complexities that impact that based upon either the type of school or the setting or the community that are around you. So I don't know, I just really think that there is kind of that common bar, and how do we reward and or help folks with that complexity factor so that all kids can achieve at that level that we set a bar for.
And that's the challenge too, I agree. Looking at some school districts in which when students enter kindergarten, they've had 3 years of formal education before they get there. And then other kindergartners enter school and are operating like a 2-year-old. And you can teach the same academic standards, but students aren't ready for the standards in a lot of schools. So how do you get them there? And those kids are always behind. And it's really difficult to catch them up at a lot of research firms. It's really hard to catch up. I mean,
How do we support the differences? How do you support
raise
the
that bar?
differences?
Yes.
Yes, Tony.
Success depends in part on factors outside of the control of the schools.
So what are assumptions we are making as a board that we don't need to make? What are assumptions you're making that you don't need to make?
I would say today what was affirmed for me is that the accountability system is not the end all be all to everything that we do. It's one piece, and so I feel a lot of pressure that this has to be. I was feeling more pressure before today that this had to be the end all be all, and now I don't feel that way. I feel better. I feel like this is one piece of a complex puzzle, and that we just have to be clear in communicating why it's important, what it is measuring, and the why behind we're doing it.
Maybe an assumption is that if it's not an indicator, we don't believe it's important. You know,
Tell me again.
that an assumption might be that if we don't put it in as an indicator and accountability, that we're saying it's not important. And so then it's this feeling like everything has to be in there, because if it's not, then we have miscarried our duty and making sure we're emphasizing the right behaviors to lead to the outcomes that we want.
So feeling pressure to put everything in
Yes.
because you don't want to be perceived as thinking it's not, something's not important. Kind of back to the big A, little a discussion a little bit.
Maybe even just that to give ourselves permission to focus on come to consensus and focus on just a few important things, and hold hands, that we have to let some of the other things go. Right.
Okay, what is important to you?
It's important to me that the decisions we make align to our ultimate goal, which is college and career focus and ready, and so that what we're putting in place has alignment.
So the decisions we make align to
Our ultimate goal.
or which is what?
That our students are successful post-high school, whether they go into the military, whether they go college, whether they go career. They're productive citizens, better adults than we are.
This question, I think, goes to really the last statement and earlier to Dr. Ernest's point. One of the things I really appreciate about grad pathways is the opportunity for flexibility with locally created pathways. And to what extent are local schools, and could they control the little a to a larger extent? Say, what are the things that are important? Here's the accountability system from a state perspective that we're going to drive. And here are little a things that are local issues. We promote and we're out there, but it may be different among different communities. And how do we, is there an assumption that we have to control all of those measures?
Okay,
You got
so
that?
I think I do. Let me repeat it.
I'm just giving local communities the flexibility to control some measures of the accountability system
You're talking about the selection of those measures too?
on their own.
Little A.
I say we believe in our community. These things are important, and we're going to put those up there.
Selection and
Right now,
evaluation.
we'll hold you accountable for those things, or they're part of the system, but they're local. And because those are the problems that, as a local school, we're facing, that we need to solve if we're going to solve this for our kids, and we need to devote resources to it. And you may tell us to spend time over here, but that's not our problem. And we can put the resources there, but they're not effective and efficient use of the resources.
I would say that we create lifelong learners. I mean, the fact that these jobs, these positions are going to probably start to evolve much quicker than they do already. So making sure that our students have the skills to adapt to the changes in the workforce needs, because I can't fathom what a job's going to look like 10 years from now, let alone 2 years from now. So we have to make sure that our students have the skills to adapt to whatever that is.
I was in an auto plant yesterday and was told that in 10 years, this will look nothing like it looks today.
It's gonna be automated.
What else is important to you? Tony?
It's important to me that the school letter grade accurately reflect the quality of education delivered.
School letter grade should accurately reflect the quality of the education
Delivered.
in that building. Yeah.
Do you need a break for your hand? Do you want me to trade you for a minute so you can rest?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Bill. I've got him, he could do it.
But then I would also say, like,
I've seen his writing.
Do you have another one, Carrie?
I would say on behalf of the educators that I would wish for them that it reflect, that they feel it reflects what they're doing. how do I wanna say this? Like in the same way that Tony said that what they're doing educationally in the building.
It's not
equally,
arbitrary.
that they have, what?
It's not arbitrary.
That it's not arbitrary, that they have control over it, or that they are able to, that it accurately reflects their efforts, or, because it's based on, you know, and we talked about criterion growth, but on the growth that they are working on. So criterion growth or their efforts. Because if it's based on something that they see as out of their control, it's a meaningless accountability system for educators. And I want them to see value in it so that it becomes meaningful for them also.
I'd like to see some staying, what would you call it? It's whatever we're implementing is long lasting, has longevity, that 2 years later, we're not rewriting it.
You don't want to do this again.
I'm sorry, Jared. Other things that are important, Tony.
I would like to see the standardized test component for high schools weighted no more than 15% of the overall grade.
Weighted to no more than 15% of the overall grade? Okay.
For high schools only?
Well, yeah, high school.
Okay, I'll clarify that.
What? Divergent. This is divergence.
There are no bad ideas today, Gordon.
No. Are you deferring judgment?
He gave me a very judgmental look. Both of them gave a very judgmental look.
Ground rules, Gordon. Other things that are important to you. Okay. Other facts you'd like to add in general? Statements you'd like to make?
I would just want to say that I want to make sure, and I know that everyone here does, but that we stay focused on the fact that our job is to do what's best for kids. We don't get caught up in what a grade might impact or who that may, as far as districts go or a school goes, but we are truly creating metrics that are going to measure and help schools do what's best for students, and that is our only concern. With an appreciation for everyone that it impacts, but our concern is what's best for kids.
Other facts.
I do think we need some sort of way to measure whether students are on track towards hitting the graduation pathways. And so something in these, so that we can have a good faith alert system, so that students have time to position themselves to meet the graduation expectations. With
Like that ninth grade indicator?
yes, I mean, I believe in the ninth grade indicator.
The 9th and 10th, right?
Ninth and 10th.
9th and
yes.
10th grade indicators. Second.
I think because we've committed to grad pathways, we have a corresponding obligation to make sure that the students are getting feedback as early as possible about what they need to do to make sure that they get to the end goal.
Focus on leading indicators.
Is that captured, Katie?
Yes.
And going along with that, I would like for us to explore this idea of shared accountability. Because to your point, Katie, I don't think it's right when another school gets someone that is a child that another school is responsible for them being way behind. We gotta figure that
And the opposite is true as well?
Yes, yes, no, absolutely. I think it goes both ways, right?
You're saying that the students have great success, that success should go back as well also?
And you even mentioned this before, Ben, with high mobility, with high mobility, we have a large percentage of students that don't ever even hit accountability.
At a school level.
You're right. Now, ESSA worked to get towards some of that, but I'm more interested in this idea of, you know, we can say, even though a lot of times when people talk about that, well, all schools go through that. They do, but there are ones that go through that at much higher levels than others of getting that, a student that's way behind. And I say we need to embrace getting them, but we shouldn't be held accountable for a student that there's no way we're going to get across the finish line, given when we get them, how far they are behind.
So it's shared accountability across multiple schools? What does this mean?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, across any schools.
So you're talking district to district, or are you talking
Yes.
internally?
I think
Instead
both.
of moving from middle school to high school, you include that?
Yeah, but so the example I gave was, but all of what you said is right. It is when you get, I was using my own example of when you have 80-some% of your juniors are all 17 or more credits behind, and 83% of those came from other schools that year. That's, how are you gonna deal with that? Right?
So one move during the school year could prevent you from counting in any school that year.
Right.
Just move one time, move a semester.
But then they hit your grad cohort though, is where I'm getting at.
In the
with that.
graduation.
Right.
But in terms of test performance, what's that?
You have kids in Indiana that will not hit under the state. Under the Fed, we include all kids. Under the state, we exclude. So part of this is, what if philosophically, I mean, we are way down the track of, you're back way up, like, are we gonna include every kid, or are we not gonna include every kid? Are we worried about subgroups, or are we not worried about subgroups?
But that's why I want
I mean,
it on
that's
the
the
list. That's why I
philosophical-
want it on the list, because I think we need to discuss it.
I mean, that's the conversation we need to have, because before we do, there's a lot to be decided before, and then as a group, we would have to say, are we going to tackle that legislatively or not? So there's a lot of bigger conversations that I think with all of this being impacted, there's just a lot to it. You know, are we worried about EL as an indicator, or are we not? I mean, that gets to, are you gonna go one system, or are you staying two? If you guys are like that one has sailed, we're gonna stay two, then the conversation's different. But Patricia sat there, and every expert in the world I've talked to said, you gotta get to one. There's too much confusing for the people in the field, for parents, to communities, including the experts at the tables today, have been loud and clear to me when I talk to them, get to one. Well, to get to one, you have to include all kids. You have to do subgroups, you have to do EL. You are very limited in what is allowed to happen within those barriers. We're gonna get to one, but it has to be under a system that you have to do by law for the feds. So we have some decisions to make. If we're saying we don't care about that, I mean, we have to follow it regardless. You're always gonna have that system right now. But if we're saying we don't care about that system and just go the state system, that's going to look different. But philosophically, where are we? Because we can't ignore the federal system. Not an option.
I agree, we have to get to one system, and I hear that a lot from lots of different folks, we have to get to a single system. And maybe we could, there are things we obviously have to include because of federal law, but maybe the weighting that we give those things is how we would put Indiana's stamp on it.
Well, just to be contrary, I don't agree that we have to go to one system. I think we should have two systems. But, well, I don't think we champion or promote the federal system. We just do what we need to do there in order to keep our federal funding, but it's not something we have to tout or push out to the public. We push out our state system, and for our purpose locally, that's what matters. And then we do whatever we have to do with the feds to make sure we stay in good standing.
So that's a decision you have not yet made.
Have that.
Okay.
By when do we need to make that decision? I'm sorry, Vince. I mean,
There's no deadline. You could go to systems forever, but just like the experts that were here
Okay.
today and the ones that are across the nation will tell you, try to get to one, but to get to one, you can't ignore the federal regulations. So we can't pie the sky this because it won't go through. Whether we heard there's a ton of flexibility, the reality of it is, I've talked to tons of state superintendents and one's still having trouble because if there's not as much flexibility and innovation opportunities as we were led to believe, we won't get it through. And so I'm not willing to put the monies at risk when we need to stay focused on a very simplistic, I think, that people can understand, that's going to drive to our basic underlying goals. Here's the other thing too, I think we have to be careful not to get caught up in the economic moment, because we will be doing this with accountability systems. I mean, it can't be dependent upon the leader at the time, the economics at the time, the goals at the time. If we did this in Mitch Daniels' era, everybody's going to four-year college because we were in the trenches during that time. You were incentivized that way. That was the message. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that was the big push. Now there's a different push, but that's where you get into the accountability system continually changing that we've all said you have to be cognizant of. So I think there's just a lot of pieces to this complex world right now that we have to be careful of. And how do we keep it simplistic? How do we look at that longevity piece? What makes sense? What's already being measured that people have already said you have to be cognizant of? What's the capacity of the districts? What's the goal of the state? There's a lot to consider, but the big parameters are much more than we think if we go to one system. If we don't want to go to one system, if Tony says, forget it, let's not go, we still have to play the game with educators in that one system, which I think is extremely confusing because we've reorged to ESSA as a department. All of our resources are going to that because we can't reorg to two systems. We don't have the capacity. We don't. I mean, if state board wants to take on one and we want to take on the other, we don't have the capacity. So we have reorged to really help districts be successful. And there's a lot of overlap, but there's not 100% overlap, which is really hard for districts who have called to say we need help with XYZ. We don't have the capacity to do it all and do it well. That's the benefit of one system.
To which system are schools actually held accountable to?
Both.
And to what extent are they held accountable on the federal, and what are the differences in state accountability?
So state accountability, obviously, is right now, today, will be in your evaluations. So that plays into your
Teacher
letter grade for
compensation.
district and schools. So it also, I mean, you're on your dashboard, so, it plays into that. But for the federal accountability, your big hitting pieces are your targeted school interventions, your ATSIs, your comprehensive school intervention, your school improvement interventions. All of that is your federal, because we cannot not do it and give $1 billion back. So really the heavy consequences beyond the letter grade or beyond the evaluation, which is also a big consideration, really lies in the federal. But I can't be dismissive of the state because there's also consequences in that I'm fully aware of. Your tag, the teacher grant for their performance, a lot of that's going to fall in the state accountability system. So if we want to get to one, this is the responsibility of this board to talk to legislators and spell some of this out. Now, if there's an appetite to get to one from the General Assembly, I don't know, but I don't know if they understand the complexities of it until we can get our charge together. And if we're going to say two, we just need to know that. I mean, if there's just not an appetite to get to one, I would just tell you from the field perspective, it's hard. It's hard from people who are living in both those worlds. It's tough.
To Tony's point, do we have to share out the data that we get from the feds? Or
Yes,
can
it's
we
the
just
law.
report?
You have to share it out. They're very prescriptive on how you do it. You also are under the fiscal part of feds and not the state. So this year we're reporting out accountability-wise with performance. Next year we have to add the fiscal piece. So it's going to be a heavy report out to communities. So what we have done is tried to mirror that to say, we have the dashboard, we're looking at that. We've been working with Georgetown and everybody else to help us with the dashboard, but we're looking at the state dashboard to mirror the Fed, so there's some sensical way to look at it. But we will have several different report outs, but you have to. I mean, it's not an option to hide it. Now, the letter grade, yes, but everybody we've talked to outside of Indiana which I'm not a big proponent of 2-letter grades either. But the problem becomes the federal letter grade is inclusive of every child and subgroup. That's where that equity piece gets in. That I think it's hard to say. There's pocket of kids that we've carved out are not in this system, but they're in this one, and which one truly represents the performance. And I'm not making that decision. I'm just saying that's the reality of the system.
And if we go to that one, we cannot include general diplomas, right? And there's a.
We can after this year because of the definition got changed. So the
Federal definition got
now
changed?
the state definition got changed. So how the schools will report out will change, not for this year, because that was legislated for what happens, in this school year, which would be reported in the rears kind of deal.
Okay.
So we have one more year of growing pains through that, but then the General Assembly changed that. So our grad weight won't be an issue after this go around.
Hey, Kate, so this is something that I don't understand as well as I want to. So what I think is true is that the purpose of federal accountability is to deploy federal dollars. And so that is a very different, and I want to say this out loud because I want to understand it. So that's a very different purpose than the state accountability, which is to put schools in turnaround and correct performance at the school level in that regard at the state level. So to me, I've struggled with this because they have two very different purposes. One, so it's that ability to deploy resources federally, so you get your Title I monies, et cetera, and that's the purpose of that, versus the state, which has a very different purpose, and I understand that can be confusing to the listener. I get that, if you have a B for federal purposes and an A for state purposes, but is that true? I mean, what we do with it, setting that to the side, but is my understanding correct that the purposes of those two, they're designed, it's like a hammer and a wrench?
I would say no.
Okay.
So the feds would also argue that. And I would say no. So our federal accountability, really our charge was to look at a lot of pieces to it. So we're looking at equity. It's similar to, the equity piece is heavy in the feds and light in our state, which there are people across the state who have trouble stomaching that we're not paying attention to the equity piece. So equity is a huge part of it. Transparency, which I would argue is in both. So alignment to what we're trying to accomplish is in both. So I think that's a big piece of it. The focus to goals is in both. So it's much bigger than just a money grab. I mean, it's not just that, because if you look at the way the ESSA is now, we'll have to go back and tweak it because of some federal things that came out with WIDA, so we're gonna have to go back and address some things. So I hate it, that's where that moving target comes in that we can't avoid. So, but I would say no, it's bigger than, I would say it's much bigger than the money piece, much bigger.
Well, I would like for us to not give a letter grade for federal accountability. I think that just makes it more confusing, and I don't think we're required to give a letter grade for federal accountability.
And full disclosure, we are not required. That's where it comes into philosophy of, do you want those letter grades to include every child in Indiana, every subgroup, which are our underserved, at-risk populations, or not?
I want those letter grades to be the state letter grade from the system.
They exclude some kids and they exclude the subgroups.
Well, that's up to us. That part's up to us.
Our ESSA plan does not exclude any kids.
Doesn't have 150 day requirement.
It does.
And where are those kids captured?
You're going to capture
I'm sorry, I'm getting off task, but I don't understand this.
You're going to capture at minimum them in grad rate if they're that transient. Our state plan, there's a pocket of kids, I have to get numbers, that are never captured. We're also in our state plan not capturing subgroups, which I get, in all fairness, superintendent, principals, teachers, that makes them very nervous, because when you start watching your free and reduced population, your EL population, your subgroups, it gets really difficult because you get yourself, some of those groups are really hard to move. So I'm very cognizant of that every child is accounted for. Every kid's accounted for in ESSA. That is not the case with the state. That's the difference in, do you want the letter grade to be inclusive or do you want it to be exclusive of groups? If you have this conversation outside of our state, it's a no-brainer. But I also understand from the field, I was listening. I also understand too where that becomes not real popular because it is hard to move some of those subgroups and you get yourself going down that TSI track pretty quickly. So I get both sides of it, all sides of it, I get it, but it's very complex.
Can you identify which subgroups you're talking about that are hard to move?
Well, I think it would depend. I mean, it depends on what subgroups are within that building. They're all gonna look different. Some schools will have maybe one subgroup, some will have multiple subgroups. So,
Well, there are also racial subgroups, there's socioeconomics. Are you talking
Yeah.
about those groups that are hard to move? Which
There-
groups are you talking about?
I taught special education. That is a subgroup that I would argue is difficult at times to move. And I don't think there's anybody in the field that sit and say some of those populations are very easy.
Which
So they
one?
require more support, they require more guidance, and that's what we're doing is trying to posture our department to offer vetted resources and more support because districts are calling us and saying, we need help with our English language, our students' English language. We need help with special ed population. We need help with whatever population we're talking about. That's not us making it up. That's the districts telling us we need more support. We need more help.
There
Don't
are
have all the
racial
answers.
groups included in that. So which racial groups are particularly hard to move?
I think it depends on the school. Some schools are doing a great job and other schools are struggling.
So do we just give up on those racial minorities? Or those
Heavens no,
soci-
that's why I'm
Oh.
a firm believer they need to be included in ESSA. Then we need to be accountable. That's what I'm saying, they're not accountable at the state level.
But if we don't collect data on those, how do we track progress? And how do we track where to put the money in? I don't want to give up on racial minorities, special ed minorities. All those subgroups the federal government put in are important. We can't ignore those kids and just focus in on certain groups.
But they're not gonna get ignored because it's already in the federal requirements. So either way, that's gonna be tracked, whether we make that a part of the
Someone
state
was making
system or
the point
not.
of going to one system and go to a state system. So I was pursuing that.
The problem, I think one of the
We're
problems.
talking about what's best for school districts. I'm asking myself, what's best for kids? What's best for every single kid in the state of Indiana? I'm not willing to give up on racial minorities. I'm not willing to give up on special ed kids.
Well, no one is, and no one has to do that, because
You
the
go to our
federal
system.
requirements are already there protecting that. But at the same time, we have to look at the big picture of education to make sure we're preparing the other 3/4 of kids for something meaningful after high school. And the reality of it is, I fear that if we will not be able to meaningfully sync pathways with accountability within the confines of the federal system.
But
That isn't true. The,
We can, because you would have to be accountable for graduation and CCR, which we would argue is the pathways. So you can marry all that.
but if we were to go to one system, it will be the federal system.
It has to be.
It's
It
not-
would be a federal system, but I'm saying within those indicators, we could have a conversation what those look like, except for some that are defined.
But the student disaggregation that we're talking about exists in the federal rules. So if we were to go to one system, it's that. We could not go to one system and adopt Indiana's system.
That's
And
correct.
ignore the federal.
That's correct,
Right,
but,
so-
in full disclosure, and I know Dr. Freitas knows all this stuff very, very well,
Sure.
so I'm not gonna be dismissive, so Dr. Freitas jump in here. At the state level too, you have to realize at the state level though, there are provisions in place that we would have to have legislative help to get to one system.
Sure.
I just want to be sure that we focus policy decisions as much as possible on students. That's, for me, that's the primary focus. Whether it has an effect on other people, obviously it will in the organization. But many decisions for me are easy because if you focus in on the kids rather than other constituencies, then the decisions become easier. So when I hear schools don't want to do it because of X, Y, and Z, yeah, that's an important point, but if kids are going to benefit from a policy decision, I'm for the kids every day. And so I just want to be sure that as we make these policy decisions, we need to listen to everybody, but bottom line for me at least, it's going to be what's good for students. And so that's why I was a little concerned. I thought we were starting to exclude some students, and if we go to the federal system, that would certainly do it. And the federal system requires us to disaggregate that information. And so once we see that disaggregated information, then we can make some policy decisions, if necessary, to help those particular groups move forward.
So to that point, what I'm hearing you guys say, we're kind of getting into the next section, which is great, you led us there anyway, is what are the things that we wish we knew that we don't know? So what are the data points? I'm hearing you say, Dr. Grace, about the data that you wish you had. What are those other things, or what are the things that we don't know that we need to know in order to move this forward?
Is 162 days a policy or a statute? Because if we're losing students because of that mark, to Byron's point earlier, why couldn't we prorate how that student is laid out as how many days they were in that school, where we shared accountability? So if 162 days is something we can change as a policy, then we capture every student in the state policy.
I was curious how that's prorated.
How the 160 days is prorated?
No, I think your point though is that if it's 90-90, that you both share in that student performance. I'm wondering how the student's performance is
10
prorated.
schools, yeah.
Right? Like they get to they scored a certain level, and now we're going to prorate their performance across both. I was unclear about that when it came up. I like the idea of sharing it and keeping responsibility for student performance on the pathway. Where are the students at? I was just curious how it's prorated. It's a question, I don't know the.
Yeah, so what we want to do today is just gather the questions and then we'll get them answered before the next session. So do you have other questions?
Yeah, how much flexibility is the federal government really going to give states to set and direct their own education policy? In my opinion, the federal model is somewhat antiquated and too heavily reliant on standardized testing. And I would like us to do something that's more future-looking than that, forward-looking than that.
Could we see to your point, Tony, could we see, I always find it interesting when these discussions come up, because as I look around, some people are nodding, some people are shaking their heads, whatever. So everybody has all kinds of whatever. I need the truth. And can I see like a spreadsheet of, here's our accountability, here's the federal, here's where we're off.
And I would like to see the.
Because I think I know pieces, but then as I watch, there are people going, and it drives me batty. I want to know. I want to know the facts. Where is it? Because folks, we got people that will help us align this if necessary, or whatever we need to do.
So you would like to see the state's accountability standards next to the federal and then a column showing what's the difference?
Yeah.
Okay.
Byron, can I add to that and ask?
We're happy to have someone do a fact check on it. We got it.
And the impacts also, what are the impacts from state accountability and what are the impacts from federal?
Somewhere.
I think
What was
we
that
just
bracket?
got it in this, yeah.
But I mean,
But
we can certainly bring someone in to fact check it.
I mean, the issue of it is many of those areas are undefined. They haven't been determined yet. I mean, just like we asked today, well, exactly what percentage or weight do you have to give standardized testing? Well, it really hasn't been challenged. So I think there's some areas where we need to test the boundaries of flexibility with the federal government.
Yeah, in federal law, as was pointed out by the speaker this morning, and I can't quote it directly, but I know it's 50% or more has to be academically based. And so we can dig out the law.
I don't think it
And
says
so
50% though. It says something like substantial.
It says a majority or substantial. I think the key word is substantial. So then it's probably defined somewhere else in the law.
But we should test it. We should test
Yeah,
it.
we can.
So that's something we need to get. What else? What else would you like to see?
I'd like to know in which ways are we currently innovative? Sort of breaking out, sort of thinking out of the box. So we've been talking about what we're doing statewide, what we should be doing federal, according to federal law. But are there some innovative things that we're currently doing that I don't know of? So what's the list that we're doing that other states are not doing?
So in the state standards or within the federal?
In the state of Indiana, what are we doing in an innovative way compared to other states?
Okay, so,
And on number 4, if you would add the impacts of those, I want to know what the impacts are to not meeting the state and the impacts are to schools to not meeting federal. I don't understand those. And number 1, Chad, answer my question, it's a policy. So we can underline that one.
Oh, okay.
152 days is a policy, so that's something.
Policy, okay.
We can change.
Already got there.
And another one to add, to
Yeah.
piggyback off of David's would be where, I want us to explore where appreciated when Patricia said, we need a state to innovate, and I'm hearing at least a little bit of a few of us saying, hey, we really want to look at this outcomes-based of readiness for a kid, whether that's employment, whatever that looks like, right? I would love for us to explore what's it look like, because I'm tired of us looking at other states and listening to experts. How about we continue to be, how about we be Indiana and be the ones?
So what
Right?
do
I
you,
think we have been when it looks at grad pathways. Now let's just take it one step further.
so what are you looking for? What is it you want to know that you don't know?
Well, yeah, what would it take to be number one?
What would it take
What
to
would
be?
it-
Okay,
A short-
we can answer that, we're done here.
What are some possibilities of that outcomes based in those, what they were calling transition items of whether it's employment, military, and I don't know what those are exactly yet, but employment, military, post-secondary, you're able to move on, where the data suggests right now it's only like 41% that are ready to.
I'm not sure I'm capturing your thoughts. So what are the possibilities of outcomes-based indicators?
Yeah, it's good enough, yeah.
Okay. You may have to reach back out to you to get clarification.
I have another one. I think one of the speakers this morning talked about simulations, that as we consider major policy decisions, that we could go back in data and do a simulation to talk about the implications of that decision. So the question is, what would it take to gear up for simulations to run on potential policy decisions?
Might be off here. I think about whole to parts and parts to whole thinking, and it seems like the big picture here is how do we communicate what's important about our schools to the community at large, to all stakeholders. And so I kind of starting to feel like federal versus state versus socio-emotional. There's like all these different aspects, and we haven't really had a conversation about what's required and what do we value, and making those decisions before you decide what all those pieces are underneath.
So you're saying create a list of what we value, like all children can learn. I'm just using that as a simple example. But there may be others. The accountability system should have certain ingredients from a value belief perspective.
What do we value so much we want to communicate it to all stakeholders? Because there's a lot of things that we value, but it doesn't rise to the need to be part of this process. And so what it is and what it isn't. I'm starting to feel like we're getting a kitchen sink approach here, and we need to go back to what is it we're trying to accomplish, and how do we stay on target and focus to do that, versus get into arguments about what it is and what it isn't. I think that we have some pretty clear guidelines, understanding what the federal accountability requires, understanding the limitations of what happens if you stick with the state, and what happens in each one of those communications, and figuring out, can you beef one up to get that ultimate goal? But we haven't talked about what is that ultimate goal. How complex is that ultimate goal? Maybe that's where it is, because it could be very simple, or based upon our conversation, it could be pretty complex. And so the complexities are the piece that I think we need agreement on, versus what's in addition to what's required.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So it's sort of start off with some belief statements. Philosophically, we believe, and then we measure any proposal against those set of beliefs. Is that?
Yes, but it has to be aligned to what, I guess we have to decide on the federal or the state. Because if we're starting with the federal as the accountability system, then is there anything else we want to add to that to kind of beef things up, because we value it so much and it's so important to say to our stakeholders. If it's with the state, you still have the federal requirements, which I think, I agree that our people are working so hard, and the mixed signals that we give just complicate matters even more beyond the complexities that they're dealing with every day in their classrooms. So I do have a strong belief that we need to focus on the federal system, because it's clear. Then if there are other things that we want to bring in, then that's, for me, where the conversation is.
Yes.
So as a follow-up to that, once we decide, I would also like to see us norm how will the state board and the Department of Ed work together collaboratively to advance whatever decision it is that we come to as a group. So what communication will the IDOE own? What's the role of the State Board of Education? What communication does the board own? And then how will we regularly update how we're moving that forward? Because I think because we have such confusion, it's confusing to everyone. It's confusing to us, it's confusing to the field about who's carrying what message and how we're working together to advance that. So wherever we land on these things, I think we have to norm that as a group as well.
Was there anything, oh, go ahead.
And I think Dr. McCormick made this point earlier, and I agree, that I would like to get a sense of the legislative appetite for making these changes. I think we can go down quite a path, and knowing that those changes have to be made through legislation, what are those changes, what legislation would actually have to be changed, and is there support for it? And
Was there anything this morning that you wish the experts had talked about that they didn't cover, that we could go back to them and get as additional information? So someone mentioned the FAFSA, I think it was Vince, data around the FAFSA idea, and does that actually move the needle? Are there things like that that you would want the SBOE staff to go find from the experts?
I would like to look at the 40 states with the summative rating other than A through F for the federal model. I'd just like to understand how are they doing that, how are they navigating this complexity, and see what we can learn from them to help inform.
So the ones who don't use that, there were 16 that do, right? So
yes.
the balance.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're saying to use different categories under
Correct.
data?
Correct. To deal with the federal piece that may help us understand to these questions of what's the impact anyway, how can we distinguish it? Perhaps there's learning in there from those other states.
Now, if you read through or you ask the experts that are here today, and most of them, they'll A through F it forever, regardless if you have one or two systems, because they feel like it's understandable to parents, to community. So the people we brought today, all the stuff that we're reading from the experts are, the big hitters that are doing some good work, it's an A through F. And I understand the frustration, but the little color coding, the stars, that's kind of confusing when you're like, you're a 1-star instead of a 4-star, what does that mean? So they're saying keep it where it's understandable. But having said that, I also understand too the complexities of 2 letter grades. I get it, because they're going to be different for some.
Other things you'd like to know before we meet again?
Are there any other states that have, they may not call them graduation pathways, but have a similar sequencing or outcome-driven component to the diploma that is like what Indiana's doing, or a few shades like what Indiana's doing, and what does their accountability model look like?
And maybe on top of that, like some that are a little bit further down the road, like Ohio's kind of got some trend information we should probably pay attention to.
Some trend information?
Some that have maybe started it prior to us that we can maybe look and see.
Sure.
They learned the hard way and they had successes in a good way. So what are those?
Oh, for this, for
Kate's comment, yeah.
Okay.
And then to build on Dr. McCormick's, what are the other policy levers that are around that? So I think that's something that's been a really good insight today is there are lots of other different things around that may be contributing to the success other than what's readily apparent in terms of what's their grad pathways model and what's their accountability model. Is there something else that they're doing that's helping make that be effective? And what is that? I don't know.
I know normalizing growth, if this group would like us to do that, I was talking to Charity and Maggie, and I know that it would, because we're under new assessment, we may have to be patient with that to go criterion. I think to do it well, I mean, we could rush it, I know there's probably a way to do that, but if you want us to do more of a deep dive into that, to see what it would take to get us to the normalizing growth, the reason we stayed away from it, Vanessa, is because we were changing assessments. So, but if you want us to go there, we would just have to do our homework on what it would take to get there.
Is that something you guys do want to, or to have a discussion around what it would take? Okay. Yes.
I have another question for the consultants. They mentioned these consortium or groups of organizations working together. I think they mentioned other states, 9 states working together on a particular thing. Are there opportunities for Indiana to join any of those consortia that are working on accountability systems or something that we're working on? Second question is, they mentioned that some of these states have received grants. Have we pursued grants to fund maybe some of the pilot things that we're doing? Maybe we don't need the money, but
we used it.
we used it. Okay, so we need more money. But are there some foundations or other kinds of money? In Indianapolis, we're blessed with a number of foundations that do provide a lot of money. Why aren't we going after those? And maybe there aren't any available, but maybe there are. So are there any opportunities for us as a state board, for a DOE to get some of this grant money?
Okay.
I also thought that I heard Patricia say that it's better to hold schools accountable for the outcome and let schools figure out how to improve where they need to improve in order to meet that outcome. I don't know if there are examples. I don't really understand exactly what that would look like. It was very abstract. It sounds
so it's
good.
for Patricia.
Yeah, she said better to hold accountable for the outcome and let the schools figure out how to improve where they need to improve in order to meet the outcome, which is sort of going back to this FAFSA piece or some of these other things. If we prescribe one behavior that may not necessarily respond to the community needs, they're going to redirect energy to that not productive behavior. That's what I would like to see. Does that actually happen anywhere?
Yeah, okay.
And if so, where and how are they doing that?
Question, hold accountable for outcome, and let's figure out how to fix it, and you would like an example.
Yeah, like, is that happening
Yeah.
somewhere?
Is that a thing?
Or is that in a dissertation? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, unless that state's new wrong. I'll go right there, I guess. Any other things that you wish you knew that we can ask for to bring into the room for next time?
What's the lottery number for next week?
Can't help you there. So, Dr. McCormick, what I would like to propose is a quick break, because in the break, what I need the board to do is come over here and I'm going to give you guys dots, and I'm going to give you 4 dots each, and I'd like you to put the 4 dots on the ones of these that are most important to you, because there are 17, and we may not be able to get all 17 done. And I think maybe in 30 days or whenever the next meeting is, so.
Just the dots on the last 3.
Yeah, not these. You'll have the opportunity to see all this, and I'll talk to you about that at the end. But anything in blue, I'm going to give you 4 dots each, and you just choose the priority, the top 4 that you'd like to see done prior to the next meeting, because we may not get to all 17, so I just want you to prioritize that. Maybe take a quick break when you do that, and then come back and we'll finish up. Maybe another 20 minutes once you get back. Is that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, let me give you the dots.
That's part of it.
I know.
So if you go to the Byron, mine's below the back.
Did I miss it?
I don't
Here, I
know
have
where
something
I
for
need
you.
4 dots.
I'm stealing
There's
4
only so
here,
much I
and
can.
then I gotta
I
skedaddle.
can stand in one day and I'm there.
I'm taking, you already missed it? That's not good.
For the dots?
I was looking at it.
Here's 4 dots. Okay. I always have keep one dot.
Do you want this sandwich?
No, I eat it.
Yeah, you're right.
No,
You're right. I agree with you. We need to get to one, and then what we're missing, then we can add in.
right. Here's, yeah. Here's,
Papers aren't sticking very well.
But we haven't agreed upon what's this, that's.
See, I'd seen that spreadsheet, but I thought
I
by
know,
all the
I know.
heads that were nodding and shaking that that wasn't right either. I'm like, I just want somebody to tell me what's real and what's not.
Just thought last night, cause I stumbled over it.
Okay, thank you. Good to see you.
I kind of noticed that, but it's okay.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Mine's
Right.
on.
I just don't want you to fall. So is that a real basketball?
It's the material, yeah.
Oh, okay, I wondered if they had
It's
like
not,
some
it's not
special
from a
thing that
specific,
happened that
no,
you got.
no.
Oh, that's
Pacers
pretty
gave
cool
it
though.
to me.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, so I have the basketball fans in my family.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, I wasn't, or, I'm listening. Well, the question is, this is required, and we have some questions about other things being left out. We haven't had a conversation about what that is that we value. So, as an example, if we want the well-rounded indicator, why aren't we talking about what to insert into this versus? So right.
I know you don't. So honestly, what we did is because we know that the feds are gonna come back and change, we didn't change something, so
Oh,
we
they
know
are.
the parameters up front. And we have to play. So that's kind of, and like, if we just let it present, and then let us go, get out in the comments.
Yeah.
Because we don't have, we just don't.
Well, sure, act like we do.
We just don't.
I
I mean, you
don't know.
would on the well-rounded indicator, but it gets into what Carrie said, how many of those, if you have 5 things making up a well-rounded indicator, you're not paying attention to any of it.
I also think it needs to be simple and clear what's their accountability, and then you can decide what you value and add it into some sort of communication.
And that's what I'm saying.
Chat. Okay, it is.
You are, you're out.
Are we gonna reconvene? Here, if you are.
We are. Did you get rid of your docs?
Want me to influence how what we're doing? Yeah, wheels up.
Okay. See ya.
I said that last time. Hey, Matt, what do we have? Yeah, are we coming back together, or are we? We are gonna like reconvene and talk again then.
After this meeting?
No, like, how close are we? Soon. Because if it's soon, I'm gonna have, if we got another hour, we got.
Oh, I can't do that. I'm starting.
Yes,
Like, I think there are 4 light
I
bulbs
can
out in this
think
room.
no more.
That's what I know.
That's awesome. I love it. This room is gorgeous.
I didn't jump
It's
back
hot.
in
It's
until
always
it
hot
started
in here, but
knocking
this
and
room
getting
is
good. And I was
gorgeous.
seeing all the disparity, and it's like, then I got back to being, where's the trash at for this room?
I don't know, but
I have some that I.
you'll appreciate this. We're doing work ethic certificate,
Yep.
and I've got a live dashboard that shows me.
What do you think of the 98%? And are you taking that as a true, so let me ask you this. You're trying to influence it. Okay, show me this, because I want to actually feel that's cool. Okay, that's cool. Okay. Okay. I mean, I don't like that, but you know, that's not. Or if like my son, or if like my son's in a leadership program, and he's gonna stay in. Okay.
I'm so calm, I'm so.
But
You'll be more easy.
Your husband's might give you a problem. Maggie might be your problem.
Right.
I'm ready if you guys are, I'm almost done.
I put mine up there.
Okay.
I have
As long as I
like
can look at
47.
you.
Yes.
Did you have these practice?
I didn't want to leave trash laying here.
You throwing my job?
I got like a yard sale or something coming in. There are budget
BJ, I've got like 10 minutes and then I'm done. I need to get back to
Okay,
work.
thank you. I wasn't rushing you, I was just.
No, I'm done, so we're good. Hey, let's go.
Good way to get that set.
Okay, board, we're gonna reconvene. We've got 10 more minutes and then we'll conclude. So if we can get everybody over.
So we've already put our docs up, is that it?
I'm about to talk about that. So that's what we're gonna do is talk about that and then I'll talk about next steps and we'll be done. So as soon as you guys are ready.
Okay, we need a couple more. I know Dr. Bertram and Kate and Byron.
I'm sorry, I put it in my trash.
BJ, he's looking for more dots. We good?
Yes.
Okay, they say we're good. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, great.
I think we're good.
All right, so we're almost done here. What I want to do real quickly is go over your convergence here. So this will be practice for you because next time Janet will take you through several convergence steps. So we're just going to do a little practice of that and try to land on what we want to move forward here and what our priority is. So I see a lot of dots on how much flexibility does the federal government give states to set their own education policy. Who chose that and why? Okay. Good enough reason. So we definitely want to move that one, try to get that one answered. Okay. Tall people, stuff these on the wall. So, and the wall is funky in here, so I don't know what to do about that. All right, we'd like to see a spreadsheet of state standards versus federal standards, difference between the two, and the impacts for each of not meeting. That's pretty important. Several people chose that. That one we want to try to get before the next meeting.
The impacts are for mine. I think we may already have the stuff on the left.
Okay, so
But I
that
could be
might
wrong.
be easy. So we'll go ahead and select that one.
I have a question on that too on the right side.
Okay.
When we talk about letter grades, does the federal government require a federal letter grade?
No.
then why are we doing it? Why would we do it? What's the confusion then if it's not necessary?
We would not have to do a federal letter grade, but you have to have a summative something. So a color, a star, you have to have some system of summative something. What we try to do is be consistent of something people could understand. Because if you're a blue, do you understand what a blue is necessarily? So we were trying to make it as simplistic as possible. Plus we were trying to, when we were under development of ESSA, we were trying to get to one system. So we stayed consistent with the state, but we could go back and change it. Now, when we've talked to people, the people like you brought in today, when we say, hey, we're considering doing this so we don't have 2 letter grades floating out there, it's interesting the feedback we get because the state is not all inclusive. They think it's a better representation of subgroups of inclusive of yada yada without letter grade.
But it could be some other indicator as opposed to.
It could be a star, it could be anything, it could be whatever you want it to be.
That was number 12, which nobody got it, but looking at the 40 states, what they are using as opposed to letter grades. And again, we'll try to get all of these, but we just may not be able to get to all of them. So in which ways are we currently innovative in the state of Indiana? Several dots on there. And then kind of a sub point of that, what are possibilities about the indicators? Looks like we have a lot of convergence on that. Who chose that and why?
Well, I chose the number 6 because I mean, I've been talking about that all day. I just think that's an important piece that we
What we can do about that.
know that our students are ready for what's after school.
Okay. Down here we've got how do we communicate what is important to our stakeholders? What do we value so much that we need to communicate? Who chose that and why? Marianne.
I think I've been talking about that one all day. I just feel like that's really important to be clear that everyone that we're communicating to the same language is understandable, no matter who you are.
So what would you want us to find out before we meet again? Like just the avenues of communication or what people want to hear? What is it? What is unpack this for me a little bit?
So that does connect to me to the conversations around what do we value so much that people need to know, more so than the tool or the formatting and what it looks like. I think that's very important, but I think first we have to determine what it is we're communicating and why.
Others chose that also.
What does it mean? What does it mean to, parents, the kids?
Okay.
Let's translate it for them to that. 'Cause that's what we've been criticized for previously. So.
DJ.
And I chose that one to Mary Ann's point is what is so important to us that it has to be included in accountability? What are those things that are non-negotiables that we have to have? And that's going to differ for everyone on this table, but I think that has to be the starting point is where do we want to land? Then we can build backwards from that. But until we decide what's important to everyone on this table, all this work is pretty.
From a belief standpoint, right? Not from a specific indicator standpoint.
Yes, absolutely.
So I will talk to Janet about this piece and see if there's something we can do in between that might get us more clarity around this before we step into the room again. Because what she's going to take you through next time is problem definition and idea finding. You can't really idea find if you don't have what your belief system is. So I have to think about that a little bit and talk to my partner in that, but I will circle that so that I remember, so that I take that forward.
Connected to that, I think, is what you believe in what's required, in the law.
Right, okay, yeah, you have to add that to your, I'm just going to do it. I can't write on these library walls.
And a way to do number, I don't know if it's 6 or 8, I can't see it there.
Yeah.
But it's Ben, one of the things Ben did with our employability standards is he sent out truly a list of all the different standards and had us mark them 1 to 5 with how important they were to us. So if we come up with some of those things that we think are core, and then you could also add on that email what's missing to where that would at least give you a way of doing that prior to coming back together. You can have some idea as to where everyone's going to land on this.
It's a good idea, BG. I'm going to think about that.
It wasn't mine. Ben had it, so. He works
Take
for
the
it.
front. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then normalizing growth, what it would take to get us there. Many of you chose that. Dr. McCormick's core staff are like, don't choose that. Is that something that's important to us? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of head nods. And then are there any others up here that you want us to prioritize? We have a couple of dots. How is the student's performance prorated? Seems like maybe a pretty simple one we can get to. Other states have something similar, every little research project. So we'll try to get to all of them, and I'm making that promise about talking to those guys. They're nodding their heads before the next one, but we may not have them all. Okay? We good? With that?
When is the next?
Well, I don't know yet. Okay.
Do we have?
So we're working, the process is gonna be similar, for the next one, so we'll schedule part 2, send out a doodle poll, see what works best, and we'll get on the calendar.
Yep, so that is one next step. The next thing you'll see from me, I will take all of this, and my writing's messy, so I'll clean all of this up, and I'll send it to, through Matt, I guess. I'll send it to you all to converge, and I'll give specific instructions how to do that on what's most important to you from the fact finding, so that Janet, my partner, can use that in the problem definition at the next session, which Matt will work to schedule. And then that's it. And we'll work on getting these things, and we'll bring this information back into the room. Typically what we do is put them on posters or things on the wall so you can see that. I don't know what we'll exactly do, so Janet and I will work on that together between now and the next meeting. Are there any questions for me or concerns or anything going forward?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I thought David was very productive there.
Stay till the end. It will, the process, you have to trust it, but it will get you where you need to be by the end, I promise you.
This is a great day.
Yeah, well,
Great,
this is
thank you.
productive, thank you.
Thank you.
Do we need a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're done.
Tell us a long day. All right, I'm heading south.
See you, BJ. Safe
careful.
travels.